You are listening to an episode of Megan is Not a Parent, But. Today's episode is brought to you by Positive Parenting Class Pass. Positive Parenting Class Pass is 6 simple positive parenting classes to kickstart your positive parenting journey. You can learn everything you need to know and get started today at bekindcoaching.com/classpass. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the 9 traits of temperament. We're going to be going through an assessment inside of the book, Raising Your Spirited Child. So I invite you, if no other episode than this episode, to get cozy, grab your notebook, and I invite you to open up as we dig in. So we are going to start today by asking the question, what is a good kid? I ask this inside of Raising Respectful Kids as in part of video 2, where we're talking about focusing on the foundations versus the details. Whenever I ask groups of parents or caregivers or even teachers, the fantasy of the good kid comes up as being told to me as they're great listeners, that they're doing things for the first time every time, that they want to do everything that their parents want them to do, right? They want to play the sports, they want to do the classes, they want to have the friends that the parents want. They do their homework on time and by themselves, and they're just nice to everyone all the time. When we think about the good kid, images of being in total control over their emotions or being happy all the time may come up, or someone who uses their words or makes good choices or just overall well-behaved, especially in public. And maybe that's when you were thinking about younger kids, we're thinking about that they share and that they're nice and that they are just a pleasant to be around. And if that too has been your vision of what a good kid is, I want you to know that you're not alone. And that's not the full picture, because in my world, I don't believe that there's such thing as a bad kid. And when we're talking about good kid, I always think to ask, like, okay, well, then if there's a good kid, there must be a bad kid. And I want you to know that in this world of positive parenting and in this world of behavior is communication, and that we're focusing on the relationship and not compliance, that there truly is no such bad kid, just as there's no such bad parent. Alexander Sutherland Neal has said, the difficult child is a child who is unhappy. They're at war with themselves, and in consequence, they're at war with the world. And I think that feels like it resonates, right? Like when we're seeing a child and they're struggling and they're acting out and they're pushing back and they're just having a hard time, what that's telling us is that they are having a hard time. And sometimes if we stay stuck in that adult POV, we start to take their behavior personally, and we start to think like, oh, they're giving me a hard time. So in this episode, what I want to do is just start to, again, pull back the layers and start to shift us into the perspective of when we feel better, we do better. And I know that for myself, when I'm feeling great, I'm able to hold space. I'm able to regulate myself. I'm able to do the things that I want to do. And if I'm not doing those things, if I'm coming up against something going on in my world, it makes everything harder. And so when I can know that for myself, then I can hold that truth with others as well. So as a way to help us reinvest our focus outside of, what a good kid is or what we think a good kid is or how they should act, we can start to shift our focus down to understanding temperament. And that's at the foundation. Our temperament sets us up for many of the things in our life. Our temperament is that innate propensity of our nervous system to respond to internal and external stimuli, much like we discussed last week, where we dug deep into this definition and what it means. I just want to revisit that our temperament is how our body reacts to our environment. And it's something that we're born with. And I really want to slow down here and say, it is not something that we choose. It is not something that we do on purpose. It is not something that we're doing to be manipulative. It's not something that we do with preconceived notions. It's how our body reacts to our environment. It's how we take in information through our senses. It's how we process our information, how that influences the behavior we put out and how we behave in our environment. So to help us assess our temperament, assess our children's temperament, I'm just going to read through an assessment from the book, Raising Your Spirited Child. So I invite you, as you're listening, I really encourage you to grab a piece of paper and mark down and take notes throughout this entire assessment. This assessment was curated by Alexander Thomas and Stella Chess, and they were two researchers that went through and found common traits after researching temperament for years, and how they bring this to us, how we can start to become curious and aware of our own temperament and our child's temperament, is that over the next 9 questions, the next 9 prompts, I invite you to rate yourself and your child on a scale of 1 to 5. So we're going to talk through these different traits, and during each trait, I just want you to think about, if you were to give it a value, 1 being a mild response on the lower end and 5 being an intense response, where would you rate yourself? But then also, where would you rate your child? And then we can start to see our temperament, we could see our child's temperament, and then we could also start to see if we're a good match. So I'm just going to go through, I'm going to give a little description of these traits, but then I'm going to just kind of read through them and then open it up for questions at the end. So the first one that we are going to start with is intensity. So how strong are your child's emotional reactions? Do they laugh and cry energetically, or are they more soft and mild? So if they're on the mild end, their reactions are low key and just pretty mild, and they're kind of, go with the flow. And on the intense end, they're going to be easily frustrated. They're going to be exploding. They're going to be, feeling things deeply. So I'm going to give you some time just to think about our reactions, but then also our child's reactions. Maybe even this is starting to think about how you've seen your partner react or how you've seen your parents react. We can start to bring this awareness outside of just our immediate relationships. The next trait we're going to talk about is persistence. And persistence is that hold on to itiveness. I think I made up that word. But if your child is involved in an activity and you tell them to stop, do they stop easily or do they fight to continue? A persistent child is a child who has an idea in their head and they have to make it come to life. This is a child who has their idea for the day and it's got to go this way, or they have this idea and they're going to make it happen. So a child who's on the mild end of persistence, they can stop easily. You can come in while they're doing an activity and you'd be like, hey, it's time to go. And they're just going to put whatever it is down and happily transition to the next thing. They're also going to take no for an answer. So when they ask for something like, hey, can I have more screen time? And you say, not today, not right now. They're going to be like, okay, maybe tomorrow. Where a child on the more intense end, the child who is more persistent, they lock in and they're going to stick to their guns. They have an idea and they're not going to drop it easily. So this is a child that is having a hard time hearing no, having a hard time saying, hey, that's not what we're going to do today. This is a child who has a hard time with disappointment. I'm thinking about, in those moments when you're like, hey, this is the plan, and the plan doesn't go through. And then they have this meltdown because it's hard for them because they've locked into this idea of what it was going to be. So persistence is how easily they can transition, how easily they navigate disappointment, how easily they can switch gears. The third trait we're going to talk about is sensitivity. So sensitivity is how aware your child is to slight noises, emotions, differences in temperature, taste, and texture. Do they react to certain foods or tags in clothing or irritating noises or even your stress level? Are they sensitive to that? Can they pick up on it? So a child who's on the more mild end is usually not sensitive to that. So this is a child who could sleep through noisy things, or this is a child who, when the vacuum's on, it doesn't disrupt their sleep. They're not affected by scratchy textures or the seams in socks or the tags in coats. They're going to eat anything. They're going to be open to whatever's served for dinner. They're going to eat it because they're not sensitive to it. They're pretty open and flexible. And this is a child who is, can be flexible within their environment. A child who's on the more intense end, the more severe end, they're going to be very sensitive. So everything has to be just a certain way for them to be able to sleep. They're going to need their sock seams lined up. They're going to need everything to feel fine. They're going to have certain textures or certain fabrics or certain noises that they avoid, even certain smells that overwhelm them. And then again, if we're thinking as temperament is the way we take in information and then it impacts the behavior we put out, a child who is having a hard time processing the lights, processing the sounds, processing the sense, they're going to have bigger emotional reactions. So their behavior is going to be communicating that and be like, hey, I'm having a hard time here. This is a picky eater. This is a child who has certain textures that they avoid or certain textures that they stick to. And so they're a child who is picking up on the world around them. Hand in hand in that is the next trait, which is perceptiveness. Perceptiveness is how they are absorbing their environment. So does your child notice people? Do they notice colors, noises, and objects around them? Do they frequently forget to do what you've asked because something else has caught their attention? This is like shiny object syndrome. So a child who's on the more mild end is going to be a child who hardly ever notices. Like they're a child that's like, oh, did you change my sheets? I didn't even notice. They're a child who stays on tasks. They're able to lock into what's in front of them. They're not easily distracted. This is a child too who can remember multiple directions easily because they're able to stay focused and stay on task. There's nothing that's pulling their attention away. On the more intense end, that child is very perceptive. So they're going to notice things are different. They're going to notice things are a different color. They're the child that goes into the doctor's office and say, hey, this is what it looked like last time. They're perceptive. They're picking up on everything. And this is a child too who may forget multiple directions, and they're forgetting multiple directions because they're taking in so much around them. They're very perceptive to everything. A child who is easily distracted. The next trait is adaptability. So we can think of this as how quickly does your child adapt to changes in their schedule or their routine? How do they cope with surprises, things that they were not anticipating? On the mild end, they're going to adapt quickly. So they're going to stop one activity and then restart into another activity quickly. They're going to be able to, again, switch gears. They are not upset by surprises. Maybe they even enjoy surprises. They're going to shift and transition quickly. So imagine if you're like, hey, it's time to go to school. We need to hurry up and go. They're going to be like, okay, let's go. They're going to be able to shift gears and be adaptable to those changes and through those transitions. A child who's more on the intense side, they're going to adapt slowly. They're going to need more time. They're going to become upset with a change of routine. They're going to say things like, well, that's not what happened last time, or, well, that's not what you said was going to happen. They're a child who's going to be on guard because that adaptability, they're like, whoa, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This is a child who wants to stick to routine, who thrives actually in routine and structure. And they're going to need time to adjust to this structure. They're going to need time to adjust through those transitions. The sixth trait we're going to dig into is regularity. And regularity is your child quite regular at the times of their day? So do they like to eat at the same time? Do they like to go to sleep at the same time? Do they need the same amount of sleep every day? And are they regular in their body functions, meaning their bowel movements and their bathroom functions? Is there a detectable pattern? So a child who's on the more mild end, they're going to be regular. They're going to fall asleep at the same time. They're going to be hungry at regular intervals. Or you're going to predict when there's going to be a snack time. You're going to predict when they're going to ask for something else. And they're going to be pretty regular in their functions of their bodily functions. They're going to want to move at the same time. They're going to want to go to the bathroom at the same time. And a child who's more intense is a child who's more irregular. So they're falling asleep at different times. They're hungry at different times. They're going to the bathroom at different times. It's hard because there's no rhythm or routine or pattern. And that's hard because then it makes it harder for you to set them up for success. The seventh trait we're looking into is energy. So is your child always on the move and busy, or are they quiet and reserved? Does your child need to run, jump, use their whole body in order to feel good? Are they constantly on the move? A child who's on the more mild end of energy is a child who's quiet. So they're going to stay in one place. They're going to be able to sit for long times. They're going to be able to attend to their schoolwork, to a movie, to play with others. They're going to be able to sit and be still even. Those are the children who, if it's raining outside, they're going to go and read a book or play a game or be able to go into entertaining themselves. Where a child on the more intense end, they're very active. They're full of energy. Their energy is always going. So this is a child who's going to struggle to sit in one place. They may even struggle to watch a movie. They may even struggle to, when it's raining outside, those are the children that are like, oh gosh, it's going to be a long day, because they don't have the space to move and get that energy out. So it's a child who, if there's no exercise, they're going to just lose it. Meaning in a classroom, if they're having to attend and sit at a desk, those are the children that if they lose recess as a result of their classroom behavior, it's going to make things worse. I actually was talking with a fifth grader recently, and they told me that their recess had been taken away. And I looked them down in the eyes and I said, I'm so sorry that they used that as a punishment, that they used movement as a punishment, but also that they took away something that would actually help you. And I think that is something that is, one, very prevalent, but two, just again, so misunderstood, that a child doesn't control that there are ways to cope with it and there's ways to support them through it. But taking away, again, this punishment for the way that their body is working is it's a traditional model that is in desperate need of upgrading. The eighth trait that we are talking through is first reactions. So when you're thinking about your child's first reaction to something, whether they're introduced to new people, or they're trying out a new activity or a new sport, or they go into someplace new, is their instinct, they're on the more mild end, is their instinct to jump right in? Is that a child who doesn't hesitate? They just walk right in and seem to learn by doing, or seem open to new activities, or they have this ability to say, oh, I'm just going to go try it, open, they're open to that change of, really, it's a change of environment, the change of energy, the change of situation? Or are they more on the more intense end, where they may reject things at first and then they may watch before joining in? And I'm laughing at myself because I am every trend. I am a hard pull back, and then I'll watch it, and then I'll lean in. So I'm like calling myself out here. So this is a person who holds back before participating. Like they're like, I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to watch, I'm going to learn, and then I'm going to feel safe to engage. They're going to learn by watching first. So they're distressed by new activities or new things because that kicks up their nervous system to be like, what's going on here? I'm having to like resettle. So this is a child who, when you ask them to do something new, their knee-jerk reaction is going to be, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do anything new. And it makes sense why we want to push on them. However, when we're pushing on them, it's stressing them more. So again, just learning how to become a good match with your child and their temperament, how understanding your own temperament and understanding how we can work together is the key here. The final trait that we're going to be talking about is mood. So how much of the time does your child feel happy, content, compared to serious, analytical, or solemn? So on a more mild end is the child who's usually pretty positive. They're going to wake up in a good mood. They're going to hop up and be like, good morning, love you. They're going to want all that like gushy connection time. On the more intense end, it's a child who's a little bit more serious and analytical. They may be a little bit more grumpy in the morning. They may need more time to wake up. They may be pretty serious or pretty literal at times. And they're going to see flaws, and they're going to kind of focus there because that's their mood. That's how they're navigating that world. So now we've gone over the 9 traits. I'm hoping that if you went through and either even just listened or literally wrote them down, I hope that you start to see like, hey, if you're closer to 9 on the scale, then that is signaling that you may have a more easy temperament. And if you're on the more 45, if you're closer to 45, the larger the number, the larger we are to having a difficult temperament. And what this is signaling is 3 different temperament types. So easily, slow to warm, and then difficult. And what this is signaling is not the parent's experience with the child, although a parent who has a child who has a more difficult temperament is by default going to have a more difficult time navigating it because we're understanding like, hey, they're having a hard time adjusting. And difficulty in anything adjusting just makes things harder, right? It's harder. And when we can get out of like, this isn't a label of the parent's experience with the child, but instead a true indicator of the child's experience, then we can start to see like, oh, a child who has an easy temperament is a child who has an easier time adjusting. They are a child who has an easier time regulating themselves. And when they have an easy time regulating themselves, then their behavior is going to be more enjoyable because they're having an easy time. And a child who has a more difficult temperament is having a difficult time regulating, and thus their behavior becomes more difficult. And really the question then that I have to parents and to caregivers and to teachers and to coaches and to any adult is, in those moments of difficulty, are you positioning yourself to be a weight in those moments? Are we positioning ourselves to be a support? Because the child is already having a difficult time. Are we going to show up and add punishments, which kicks up the heat, makes things harder for us and for them? Or are we going to shift into becoming a support by becoming supported ourselves, by learning tools ourselves, by practicing new methods ourselves? It's hard when we're in a more traditional mindset and we're like, okay, well, this needs to be fixed. Or it needs to be fixed right now, or it needs to be taught right now, or like something needs to change right now. And that kicks on our own sense of urgency. And instead leaning into saying, hey, there's time to practice this. I can get into spaces to learn this. I can learn to turn down my sense of urgency so that I can show up so that I am able to support and connect to my child. because I know that a good kid is a supported kid. A child who has a difficult temperament can be supported in learning new tools, learning coping strategies, learning spaces that support their growth versus treat them as an adversary and kicking in those threat responses. How do I know this? Because I am a child who has a difficult temperament. I would score between 4s and 5s on every single one of these traits. I know this. This is the space of compassion. I have deep compassion for myself, and I can hold that space for children because it's hard. And I know that if a child is kicking and screaming and biting and throwing things and saying curse words and running away and hiding, I know that I can dip into my toolbox and become a space to support them without adding more pressure, more weight, without kicking on that fire harder and bigger and stronger. My goal then is to connect to the child, not overpower the child. And that is a huge paradigm reframe. It's a whole paradigm shift. And that's the shift that I hope to offer to parents and to you listening. And wherever you are in your journey, whether this is the first time you've heard this, whether this is the 100th time you've heard this, I hope that you're leaving today with saying, when my child is acting difficult, it is because they are having a difficult time. It is not because they are giving me a difficult time. And that there is a real space of accountability and a big call in for you as the caregiver to say, am I being a weight or am I being a support? And if you're finding that you're being a weight and you want to learn how to be more of a support, then there's resources there to help do that. This podcast, the classes, other spaces. I share all the time, all the books that I'm reading or have read. There's different spaces to meet you all along that journey so that you too can start to become better supported so that you can support them. So in closing, I want you to consider what changes in your parenting would help your child feel supported. I'm going to say that again. What changes in your parenting would help your child to feel more supported? What changes in your parenting would help you feel more supported? As you reflect on your parenting, are you grounded in compliance or are you grounded in relationship? Are you showing up to connect first? Or are you showing up to correct first? Correction, if we're leading like, hey, you need to change that, and that correction is kicking in, then that's a signal that, hey, we're focused in compliance. And a child who is having a difficult time, compliance is the last thing on their list. They're going to buck back and they're going to push back. But a child who is being connected to and focused on relationship, then they're going to be able to co-regulate with you and help you downshift and step into spaces of boundaries and limits and agreements together, where you're not fighting each other, but you're coming to cooperate and collaborate on finding that solution. Through today's work, if you've taken notes, if you have any thoughts or takeaways, I want to know them. And there's 3 ways to share. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can share your thoughts and takeaways on social media and tag me. And you can share your thoughts inside of our dedicated posts of our Facebook community, Positive Parenting with Megan Ford. I want to say thank you. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for staying to the end. My mission in life is to help support parents in feeling supported and empowered in doing this work. This podcast, my Facebook community, my programs are all there to help parents work through the phases of awareness, education, and practice. And if you are ready to take the next step, if you're ready to dig into what this work could look like for you, then I invite you to take action inside of the connections class of emotional validation. Inside of this class, it'll help you balance your parenting toolbox by helping you connect to your child in a way that helps them feel safe, seen, and heard. You can get started today inside of class 2 of Positive Parenting Class Pass by visiting bekindcoaching.com/classpass. And as my free gift to you, you'll have access to raising respectful kids, where you can go even deeper into the foundational work. I am so thrilled that you are here, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Bye, friends.